Hello, welcome, and thank you to everyone for joining today's virtual Fireside Chat with Baiju Vasani. My name is Joanne Lau. I am a partner at Allen & Overy and one of the co-chairs of the HK45 committee. Before I hand this over to Victoria to conduct this interview, let me first give a brief introduction. Today's interview is part of HK45's third series of virtual Fireside Chats. In these Fireside Chats, we interview senior practitioners around the world to hear about their journey, their values and successes, and very importantly, what embracing diversity means to them. Victoria is a counsel in the HKIAC's arbitration team and a HK45 committee member. Before joining HKIAC, she worked at a leading international law firm at Moscow in areas of arbitration, as well as real estate and corporate transactions. We are delighted to have Baiju as our guest today. Baiju is currently a partner and co-head of international arbitration at Ivanian and Partners based in London and Moscow. For the last 2 decades, he has practiced as an advocate and arbitrator in numerous investor-state disputes and international commercial arbitrations. And throughout his career, Baiju has been passionate about mentoring and bringing diversity into the international arbitration field. So I am sure we will hear more about that today. Thank you, Baiju, for joining us. And with that, I will hand this back to Victoria.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joanne, for your kind introductory words. And thank you, Baiju, for joining us today. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you with us. I suggest we start our journey interview to your days when you were a student. And we know that you did the Bachelor of Laws at the King's College. You completed 2 LLMs, one at the London School of Economics at University of Oxford. You also did the bar vocational course at the City University of London and JD at Northwestern University School of Law. And could you please share with us, did you always want to become a lawyer? And if you hadn't gone into law, what would you have done?
Thank you, Victoria. Let me first of all thank you for having me on. It's a real honor and privilege. Did I always know I wanted to be a lawyer? No. As I've written in one of my LinkedIn posts, I had a very, I want to say tiger mother. It's quite an en vogue phrase. I had wanted to be a historian or a poet or a writer or something much more romantic than a lawyer. And I remember I'd applied for history or English literature to a number of universities. My mother got wind of the fact that her son would likely be a poet and decided that that was not acceptable to her. She went into the school. This is a true story. She demanded that each of the applications for university be changed to law. Considering I was only 17 and therefore technically a minor, that request was exceeded. And I changed everything to law. They asked me, I said, look, I'm sorry, but if my mother says I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a lawyer. And off I went to do offer and acceptance at 18 years old. And the rest, as they say, is history. I think had I not had sort of a parent who were minded to put me in a particular profession, had I had the skill, of course, I would have been a footballer, right? I think that's every young boy's dream is to be a professional footballer. Unfortunately, God never blessed me with an ounce of particular skill in that regard. So I think what he did bless me, or she did bless me with, was an ability with words. So I think journalist, poet, historian would have been more appropriate. But of course, as per a good Indian boy, acceding to his mother's wishes, I became a lawyer.
Yeah, thank you. And when you went to US to complete the JD in Chicago, I perhaps you were not so much aware of the possibilities in education or profession as young practitioners are aware nowadays due to the internet and social media. So my question is how you decide to go to US and why?
Yeah, it's true. It wasn't as today where you have sort of LinkedIn or social media posts that say, hey, do this, do that. It was very much happenstance. I was in Chicago on a business trip, and I met the head of admissions at Northwestern University at a bar called Cactus Cantina. Great nachos if you want to if you like that. And we just sort of introduced ourselves at the bar, and I said I'm a lawyer in London, and he asked me probably quite obtrusively was how much do you earn? And I remember very clearly I earned £24,000 a year, which in London terms in the 90s was pretty tidy sum. Right, it was quite high on the scale, and he said, "Well, in America, starting lawyers make $75,000." And I remember my jaw dropped, and I was like, well, "That's just a crazy differential." And he said, "Listen, we're starting a program at Northwestern for qualified lawyers who want to do a JD, but don't want to spend 3 years doing a JD, but can do it in 2. So the LLM, of course, is 1 year." We at Northwestern are giving away a JD in 2. Would you be interested in being a guinea pig? To which I said, yes, if there's $75,000 at the end of the rainbow, then yes, I'm interested in being a guinea pig. And then I did the LSAT and I joined, and of course it was difficult, Victoria. I think anyone listening, to leave your home country where you know the system, you know the regulations, you know the language, you know the food, you know the culture, and to just sort of give up your life essentially and say, okay, I'm going to go. And particularly with a JD rather than an LLM, I really did sort of just go for it. Had it failed, of course, I would have come back to London with the tail between my legs and say, well, I tried and failed. But it was very much sort of an American adventure with the idea that I was leaving London and seeking pastures anew.
And if we look at your professional career, we can see that you have been focusing mainly on the dispute resolution work from the start. And this comprises of arbitration and litigation. And how did you choose this sphere of interest for you?
Yeah, I wish. So at the time, look, in the 90s, there were actually very few law firms that had what I would call direct to arbitration routes, right? They're probably at the time, maybe Freshfields was, Coudet Brothers, at the time. But there were very few, maybe Lalive at the time, but there were very few who had established arbitration practices. Certainly not many, if at all, in the United States. I have to say, I wanted to be a corporate lawyer in New York, right? That was when I went to America, I was fixated on the idea of having a corner office overlooking Central Park and doing the biggest corporate deals in the world. And that I have to say, that's what I wanted to do. And I did a summer associate, which is what you do in the United States. I did a summer associate stint at one of the most prestigious New York law firms in the world on corporate law, and I hated it. I absolutely, it was clear that it wasn't my cup of tea. And I was very lucky that I did 2 weeks at a law firm called Fulbright and Jaworski, now Norton Rose Fulbright, in Houston, where I did 2 weeks of international arbitration, and I loved it. I was like, oh my God, it was like angels were singing, and I realized that this was my life's calling, you know, where previous litigation I'd done in London was fine. Employment law, insurance law was okay. The corporate law I'd done in New York wasn't for me. And then all of a sudden I did international arbitration once. And the idea of having a client from one country, opposing counsel from another country, their client from another country, 3 arbitrators from all different countries, and trying to meld this beautiful mix of politics, diplomacy, and law. And, you know, for me, it was like, this is it. This is me. And so I would say that how I fell into it was happenstance, really. I was lucky.
Yeah, but I also think that you were lucky that you had a chance to compare the corporate field with the dispute resolution. Yeah, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, I can see how corporate law is exciting in the sense that you're doing big deals, but actually underneath that, there was a lot of similar work. You know, the sort of the due diligence. A lot of the clauses were template, you know, and also I didn't quite love the culture. I remember one drinks at the end of a particular closing, which was very exciting. You do the closing, you get this little trinket, right? Like we don't do this in arbitration. We don't get little plaques, right, when we finish cases. But in corporate, they give you this little trinket. And I remember going to the trinket, we're drinking margaritas, and each person was talking about their favorite Ferrari, you know? Now, maybe this was a particular period in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, but I thought to myself, this isn't what I really, you know, want. It didn't float my boat. And I quickly realized that sort of investment banker, and I hadn't become an investment banker for that reason, you know, that I wanted a bit more intellectual stimulation. I wanted a bit more of an academic tilt. I wanted something that's a bit more with the politics and diplomacy, you know, that, and I had no idea that international arbitration would be that field until I did my 2 weeks at Fulbright, which completely opened my eyes, and I realized that's the field I want to do.
Yeah, and you have become a partner in international law firm in Washington in 10 years. After the start of your career, and I think to my mind this is like fantastic achievement. And can you tell us more about the early days of your career and how eventually you get where you are today?
Yeah, so look, I have to say the early years of my career, I was single. I was dedicated. I worked incredible hours. You know, looking back, it was, I mean, I'm talking an average probably of 25, 26, 2,700 hours a year. Some years 3,000. I remember vacations, working while I had the flu. You know, it was rough. It was all the American, you know, law firm experience that you can imagine. But having said that, looking back, it was a great foundation for learning on the job, and I accomplished what you know, sort of in half the time what it would take, let's say, if you're working 1,400 hours to accomplish otherwise. So would I change it? No. Was it healthy? Probably not. But I think that foundation then set me up for the rest of my career, where I was really able to fortunately boast knowledge at a younger age, having done so much earlier. So, you know, I would say mixed feelings when I look back at making partner quickly and, you know, being in big law. And of course, now I've done very different things, right? I've sort of decided that I'm going to come out. I have come out of big law, which I've been in for nearly 20 years. But you know, what I would say is in the junior career, I sort of embraced everything that was given to me, right? No matter what it was, literally threw myself in at the deep end, put my social life on hold, put my life on hold. Now, is that healthy? No. Do you know, on my LinkedIn series, would I suggest that? No. But did I do it? Yes. And if one is to do it, the junior years are the ones where you should jump in at the deep end and just experience it all, right? Give it your all, and then sort of come out of it, as long as you can come out of it, right? Once you create a bad habit, like a Stockholm syndrome, and you're continually working, that's not good. But if you can work your way to the surface, right, and hopefully at some stage come up for air, it's fantastic. But it at the time it felt right. Looking back, I don't regret it. And of course, as you say, it helped me sort of as a foundation for my career.
Mm-hmm. And in 2019, you became a managing partner and the global head of international arbitration at Ivanian & Partners, London, which is the firm that originally based in Moscow. And what do you find particularly challenging and interesting about your new role, and whether you were familiar before with Russia, both in cultural environment, food, language, and maybe in professional with colleagues and clients?
Yeah, it's probably one of the most unusual moves someone has done. Certainly, most unusual move in my career. You know, I would have happily stayed in big law the rest of my career. I was very comfortable. I was very happy. But you know, I and maybe this is wrong or right, but I felt, look, you know, I'd like to sort of look back on my career and said I did interesting things, right? And we're all, you know, we all make good money. We all do decent work at some stage, right? But I want to look back and say I did risks, and I did things in, you know, tell my grandchildren, hey, let me tell you about the time where I quit big law and went to Moscow. You know, like I wanted to have stories to tell and say, look, and if it didn't work out, it didn't work out. You know, I bet on myself to bounce back. So I don't know why, but I had a career since about 2010 where I was doing a lot of Russia CIS work. And I didn't speak Russian at the time. And why I had that particular leaning. But I think once you get a sort of reputation to do Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, Belarus, Estonia, Russia. So I was doing a lot of work in the region. And one of those cases took me to Moscow quite often, where I met quite a few different people. And that sort of led to the opportunity where a big project presented itself. And I was at one of these crossroads in the life to say, well, look, I can stay in this comfortable armchair, right, like a lazy boy, right, or I could take a risk. And you know, I talked to a lot of people, and I have to say, some people told me, listen, you'll ruin your career, right, if you make the move, right? It's safer to be in the armchair, and then you'll be an arbitrator one day. And you know, it's sort of the conservative approach. And others were like, well, look, you only have one career, you have one life, take a risk. So I decided to take a risk, and I have to say, it's been absolutely fantastic. I love Russia. I love Moscow. You, Victoria, I know you're from Russia and Moscow. It is, you know, it's a culture I've always admired. I love the food. I love the literature. I'm learning the language. My colleagues are fantastic. What I think is most challenging is convincing clients who are not from the region to retain me, even though I am at a Russian law firm, right? So they kind of have this, so it's all about, and I do want to do a LinkedIn post on this, it's about branding, right? If I was at a an English law firm or a US law firm, they wouldn't think twice. Think, well, I'm hiring Mr. Vasani, and he is a lawyer at an English law firm, right? But the fact that I'm at a Russian law firm, all of a sudden there's this different mentality or different idea of what I would do, even though the work I would do, the team I would bring would be the same. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting to me as to why in this field, so many clients and so many of us have an idea that it's the English law firms or the American law firms or the European law firms that have a hegemony on international arbitration, right? That only lawyers of those particular law firms should be or could be doing the biggest cases. And I'd like to break that. And I know that's a huge statement, but I just don't see why a Russian law firm, a Chinese law firm, a Japanese law firm, an African law firm, a Latin American law firm can't be doing the biggest cases. And I'd like to see if that's possible. It may not be, and I'll again, tail between my legs, I'll come back and say I tried and I failed, but why not try?
Mm-hmm. I heard that you might say the most challenging thing in Russia is the weather. So, but I assume that you already getting used to it, right? So
yeah, it is. Although I have to say, look, I'm from London, so weather is of course always something close to my mind, because grey and rainy can describe any particular month in London. Yeah, the weather in Moscow, actually, I don't mind. I'm one of these people who quite like winter clothes. Mm-hmm. I love the beauty of the snow. The only thing I hate is the thing they spread on the streets in Moscow, this sort of chemical that ruins your shoes. That's the only thing that sort of kills me. But other than that, no, I'm good with the weather. And actually Moscow does get a remarkable amount of sun in the spring and the summer, so it's nice to actually see anything other than grey skies in London.
Yeah. And speaking about your multicultural background, your parents immigrated to London, and as you said, you worked both in the US and in the UK. You travel a lot around the world for work, and I'm interested to know what all this experience, how it formed your view on the diversity in the legal profession, and in particular in arbitration, and what actually the diversity means to you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the one thing I would say is obviously, look, diversity is a very difficult subject, in the sense that you have to define. Gender diversity is relatively simple, in that those who identify with a particular gender will say, well, we need to have more women as arbitrators, more women as senior partners, and that's of course a laudable aim, and one we should all strive for. Racial diversity is a little bit trickier, in the sense that you have those who are minorities in a majority country, such as me, and you have others who are like Indians in India, right? So there's me, who's an Indian origin in London, and an Indian in India, and what's the difference between me and that Indian, right? In terms of racial diversity, in a sense, that person, is there a difference between someone who grew up as an ethnic minority and someone who grew up as an ethnic majority in their particular home country? And I think that has some tricky elements. But most of all, for me, traveling around the world and seeing these people, lawyers in their elements, is just how much quality there is, Victoria. Just literally, I mean, I talk about Russia, for example, the amount of really high quality arbitration lawyers in Russia who are, I would say, untapped, right? And then, and the same in India. When I spent a lot of time in India, the amount of really high quality Indian lawyers. And what happens is, I don't know why, and this is the kind of movement that I would love to help break, which is breaking, which is clients continually saying, I have an arbitration case, I need to go to London to find a lawyer. Why? right? Why not in Mumbai? Why not in Moscow? You have fantastic lawyers in those jurisdictions. Why do you need to go to London and pay double the price for the same quality, really, that you could get? And it's sort of this idea that quality is to be found in these particular jurisdictions and not in those particular jurisdictions. So for me, diversity, what you asked me what I've seen in concept of diversity, working around the world and traveling around the world, is really that there needs to be a reflection of clients' needs with different types of arbitrators, different types of counsel from different places. The good thing is it's happening, right? You now see, if you go to the ICSID website, for example, and you look at the lawyers who are bringing or defending these cases, you now get lawyers who 10 years ago would have only been local counsel, right? Who would have been relegated to that position, and you'd have, some fancy law firm in London or New York who would be the main counsel. And I think that is only going to increase. Where we still, so in counsel work, I think I see the move, right? The boutiques, the law firms in different jurisdictions who are now taking on lead counsel roles. And I think that's fantastic. Where I still think there's a lot of work to do is as arbitrator, right? You still see the same names in the same positions. I think the institutions are doing a great job of finding the best who didn't make the move to London or Paris or Geneva or New York, or who have and have gone back to their home jurisdictions. And I only hope that continues to increase. But what I would say is that there is so much untapped potential. You look, for example, you look at the Vis Moots, right? Look at the winners of the Vis Moots, right? Those are, fantastic lawyers from the Indias, the Russias, right? The Chinas of the world, who are fantastic. And I feel it's sad that they might feel that they can only do a really good international arbitration career if they move to Paris, rather than stay in their home jurisdiction. So that is something I hope to see in the next 20 years, is this absolute diversification of the international arbitration sphere. Gone are the days of the 80s and 90s where you only have one or two cities that have, full power over this field, and to make it as diverse as the field is.
And besides your career as an arbitrator and as a counsel, you also have a very solid teaching experience, and you are adjunct professor at Georgetown University in international law, senior fellow of international law at SOAS University of London. And what do you enjoy the most about the teaching, and do you have any maybe teaching techniques that you wished your professors had back at your university days?
Yeah, I have to say I absolutely love teaching. So obviously it's something I do as adjunct. I do it for free, right? I don't get paid. I take time out of my career to do it because I love it so much. I think what I love most is twofold. One is just to see the progression of the development in the students' minds, right? From the beginning of the semester to the end of the class, and how they sort of develop their own understanding of international arbitration. And then they go off in their career. And then a lot of them are still in touch with me today and are, senior associates at amazing law firms, or they're in government, and still say, hey, I remember you taught me this, and that stuck with me, and that's fantastic. And so that's I think that's what teachers love all over the world. In international arbitration, I have to say what I love is taking someone who's fresh to the field and saying to them things like, let's say commercial arbitration, I'll say, there's a tribunal set up and there's a question over whether they have jurisdiction because of a clause, right? Who do we think should decide whether they have jurisdiction or not? And not one person at a fresh would say the tribunal themselves, right? The competence principle. Mm-hmm. And then I'll say to them, so what we have is that the tribunal itself decides on its own competence. and they can't get their head around that. You know, they say, what? That's like the fox deciding whether they're allowed in the hen house, you know? And then explain why, how it works, what's the advantage, how it works. And that kind of fresh thinking, or I ask them, what if you have a BIT and I'm a domestic investor and I want to make a business in my home country, and I create a subsidiary in Cyprus, and then I invest through my Cyprus subsidiary, and now I sue my home state because they expropriated my investment. They say, absolutely not. That's not foreign investment. That's ridiculous. You know, that's circumnavigating the system. And then I'd show them Tokyo's Tokeles, or, you know, other cases, and just how a fresh perspective to look at things that we might take for granted and say, well, that's the way it is. And how their innate understanding of the world and justice in the legal system, and then to try and mold that or change that initial perception to say, come on, try and agree with me that if the BIT doesn't say that you can't, then you can, right? Do you agree with that? Or do you agree with Prosper Wilde's dissent in Tokyo's Tokeles that foreign investment should mean something innate? Right, and this isn't what the system was meant to do. So it's things like that that I absolutely love. And then very quickly on your second point, what I do think, yeah, I much prefer the Socratic method. So in London, it was very much lectures, right? So there were a bunch of us, loads of us, in a room, and the professor would, you know, give their amazing knowledge. At Oxford, it was very much one-on-one. You sit in a fireside chat, actually, and we talk about philosophy and various things. In America, it was the professor walks around the room and she says, "You, Vasani, right? Tell us about the case. Stand up and tell us about the case." And whoa, I now looking back, I love that, right? Because it makes you do the work. It makes you think on your feet. It puts you under pressure. So I'm very much pro Socratic method when it comes to learning, and to pit people against each other to say, this student has a different view. Both of you stand up, debate, right? And to make it, you know, more advocacy, more like how it would be realistically when one is in private practice. So I think that is certainly something I've tried to bring to bear in my teaching.
And of course, today we cannot miss talking about your mentoring series project on the LinkedIn. I think it's getting more popular and getting many views. And it's very interesting to know how this idea came to you, and whether you want to turn it into something bigger. Maybe you want to launch the podcast, or to write a book. Can you just share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2020, of course, we were all sitting in the pandemic at home, and I read a LinkedIn post by someone who had said that she had made a commitment to herself to make one post a day on LinkedIn, just to see how it would go. And she had so much more engagement and thought it was fantastic. And I guess I was craving human company at the time. You know, in 2020, we were all sort of lonely. Of course, I had my family, but in terms of professional engagement, I had none. And I thought to myself, you know what? Why not post one thing a week and see how it goes? And I'm very lucky that I have a number of, they call me mentor, but I would say peers, right? I still think of myself as quite a young junior lawyer, but who call me for advice, and I'm very happy to give it. And they all say, "Oh, it's so great that you have sort of anecdotes and experiences and different ideas." And I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take a year, because it was an unusual year, right? It was unprecedented. I thought, why not? And I have to say, I thought to myself, Victoria, it's kind of, if you're a serious international arbitration lawyer, right? Like you want to be one of the best, right? Then to put yourself out there and say, here's my life, here's my feelings, you know, maybe it's the wrong thing to do. I don't know, maybe I should be a mystery and sort of very academic, you know, and just I only think about law and I don't have particular feelings about topics, and that would be a better way to be. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to put myself, I've taken risks with my career, I'm going to do it, and it is, and I sort of put myself out there every week and say what I think. And sometimes that goes over well, sometimes it doesn't, and that's normal. You know, I can't be that everything I put out will always resonate with everybody, or everything I put out there everyone will agree with. But I say how it is, I say how I feel, and I'm enjoying it. I have to say, I love sort of it's almost cathartic for me to say, here's how I feel about a particular topic. So I think the only danger is I'll run out of things to say. You know, my wife will say, well, that's never going to happen. but yeah, I you know, I'm hoping to keep it up for a year. Then, you know, do I have plans for it? Not really. I mean, I think probably I'll turn it into a book, with the idea of hopefully doing something for charity, right? So, you know, I'm touching the table. I'm lucky that, you know, my job is well paid, so I don't need the money to make a book and, you know, make money. So hopefully something charity related would be great. So I don't know. Who knows? Maybe what we say in America or the UK is a stocking stuffer, right? So something that someone can buy for Christmas or holiday period, and for their associates, and then the proceeds go to charity. Something like that would be amazing. But I haven't yet thought about it.
Yeah, but I'm sure that it will be very helpful, especially for those who start the career, because yeah, it just accumulates like the ideas that or concerns that we all have, and it's very interesting to see that other people have the perspective on that and to compare to ours. Yeah, and
yeah. Sorry, Victoria. Let me just say this. Yeah, that certainly I wanted to get across, because what has always struck me, right, is people look at me and say, you've made it, right? You're an arbitrator at ICSID. You know, I've got a few cases at ICSID. You're an arbitrator in other commercial cases. You've done lead counsel in big cases. You're a partner. And I don't feel I've made it. You know, that's the remarkable thing. I still think I'm sort of juniorish, you know? I still have the same feelings, the same perception, the same fears, the same concerns, the same ambition to say, you know, I feel I'm sort of halfway, or even not even halfway, you know. And so what always struck me is, and maybe my peers really do feel they've made it, or maybe they're faking it till they make it, right? But I wanted to be sort of vulnerable and say, yeah, I honestly don't feel I've made it. I feel this as if I was a junior. I still have so much to do, you know. The rest of I've got, I don't know, another 20 years. So I'm for me, I'm halfway, and I still have the same concerns, worries, thoughts, ambitions. You know, I still need guidance. I still would like to be a sponge and learn what I can. And hopefully it gets across the fact that career, it's not a mountain where, you know, after you make partner, or after you get your first few arbitrator appointments, suddenly you've made it and then it's plain sailing, right? It's like a flat line. It's not. It continues to be the same horrific roller coaster ride that it is as a junior lawyer. And hopefully, if I get that across, that'll be a job well done.
And speaking about the mentoring, so did you have a mentor like through your career, or maybe studies, and how they maybe shaped your career or career move?
Yeah, you know, look, I've if anyone looks at my CV, I've never really been attracted to go to a law firm that is sort of has already made it. Right? It's never been something that I wanted to do, to go to a law firm that is in the sort of top of the GAR, be, you know, associate number 52 or partner number 27, you know, and sort of go on that conveyor belt. I've always wanted to go to law firms or do things that I can sort of make a difference, make an impression, make a footprint, sort of put a little bit of my own ideas onto it. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. You know, one can only looking back. But the downside of that, of course, has been I haven't had these sort of immense mentors. I wish I could say, you know, I've had a Paulson or a Gary Bourne, you know, or a Paula Hodges sort of, you know, to look up to and say, hey, Baiju, do this, do that, do the other. I've never had that. Mm-hmm. You know, I've had people who I consider mentors, very good friends, like Arif Ali, who's now co-chair at Decade. But I would say the person who's come closest to be a mentor to me, who unfortunately passed very early, is a person called Professor Thomas Welder. Mm-hmm. So Thomas was a professor at the University of Dundee, and he was absolutely amazing. What I loved about Thomas, and I think what has sort of rubbed off on me, is he liked to look at things differently, right? So he would look at the perceived wisdom, the conservative view. Umbrella clause means X, right? Investment means Y. Competence means Z. And he would say, yeah, but let's look at, why don't we turn it upside down, you know, and look at it a different way. And that kind of thinking has sort of taught me that there isn't only one way of doing things, mm-hmm. right? And there isn't only you get your home degree, you do your LLM abroad, you go and work at a name law firm, that's how you make it, then you be an arbitrator, and then you do this, and then you do, you know, almost like a conveyor belt system. It is, and it can be different for everybody. And I think that's the one thing that's rubbed off on me is to challenge perceived wisdom, to say that might be good for you, but it's different for me. And again, as I say, whether that's right or wrong, I'll only know at the end of my career. And it may well be, Victoria, that you know, I have to say, and hopefully people listening will take this to heart, that I might look back on my career and say, I could have been more successful had I taken a more direct or conservative route, right? But I want to say I took a route where I had fun, right? I know that sounds really strange, but I want to take a route that I had experiences, you know, I had memories, I enjoyed it, you know, and it wasn't, I don't want to be where I'm like, look at me, how successful I am, but I've been miserable for 10 years. I don't really want that type of career. And if it means I'm less successful but happier, I'm game. I'll do it.
Yeah, and you are also, I think, an example of a person who manages the top job in the field and also the parenthood at the same time. So how do you prefer spending your time with a family? Maybe you have some like tradition that you keep when you are free from work?
Yeah, it's a great, so I'm going to do some LinkedIn posts on parenthood. So my wife is also a very successful partner, more successful than me, and I hope eventually much more successful than me. I would love that. She's just become co-head of CMS's practice in London, Sarah Vasani. Parenthood is very much a sort of it's something that for which there is never the right time, right? It's the next sort of a post I want to do hopefully soon, which is that people say, I'll have children at the right time, right? There is never the right time, because there's always, either you do it as an associate, you know, whether it's you or your partner, you know, you do it as an associate, you do it as a partner, it's always going to be difficult. Because kids are difficult, with career, you have to balance the two. You have to have employers that embrace the two, and there's no getting around it in the sense that, you know, it's not the easiest thing to balance one's motherhood or fatherhood and a career. But we have Sarah and I, we have 3 kids. and we've been and both stayed as partners at law firms. And of course, I think a lot is to do with investing in nannies, right? We spend a lot of money on childcare. A lot is the support network, parents and family and cousins and aunts and uncles who support. We have a very boring schedule where we sit down and we look at calendars. It's really unromantic, but we literally sit every week and we compare calendars. I need to be around Tuesday night. Okay, I'll make sure that I'm home Tuesday night to put the kids to bed. Wednesday, I've got an early start. Fine, I'll take the kids to school on Wednesday morning. And it's a partnership of equals where both parties have to really lean in, to use a sort of Sandberg term, and to try and make sure that they focus on the best for the child, but also, look, I want to invest in my career, and that's what I want to do. And really, it's about, you talked about tradition. Really, it's a case of I want my kids to see both their parents working in collaboration, right? Not just me as the sort of the man making lots of money and being away, and my wife being at home. I don't want that. I want them to see a powerful woman. I want them to see my wife as a superstar, which she is. And actually, if that means I take a step back, I'll take a step back. Because I think I had too many partners, and of course, look, I'm not judging anyone's choices by any means, but I haven't seen a female partner with a stay-at-home spouse, right? I've seen many male partners with stay-at-home female spouses. I've never, and I'm sure there are, right? But look, if it's the case where I would gladly give way if that's what I needed to do. And so I really think it's about collaboration, communication, having the kids see role models. But tradition for me is simply a question of quality time, right? I don't want someone else to, as much as they spend time with the nannies, and of course, working means I have to work. When I'm with my kids, it's about the quality time, right? It's about making sure that, they know that we are invested in them. Mm-hmm. It's a difficult balance, Victoria. No one's saying it's easy, mm-hmm. but if you get it right, it can work. I really believe it can work.
And having so many responsibilities, being a parent, being a partner. So how can you manage the stress at work, and how, because you need to be with a cold mind, especially like at the hearings, and do you have any recommendation for that?
Yeah, it's interesting, this question, because I think I'm a little bit lucky that I innately don't particularly get stressed. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. I wish I did. I guess I approach things and understand that work is work and personal is personal, right? Look, there are obviously techniques there. If you exercise right, if you eat well, if you meditate, all these good things that you should be doing anyway. But for me, I think it's just about keeping it in perspective, right? You're in arbitration. If it's taking over your life and you're thinking, wow, this case, I'm feeling, I'm like stressed. You think, well, look, you're not unwell, right? There are people battling cancer. There are people in, parts of the world that, don't know if they're going to, survive a few more months. There are people who are dealing with their kids being unwell. Just put it in perspective. You have a stressful job. I mean, you make a lot of money. You have a great career. Your job's stressful. Okay. In perspective, it's not that bad. There'd be millions of people who would die to be in your position, right? So to be stressed out about, and things we get stressed out about. Well, I only got this much raise, I didn't get this much raise, or, this arbitral tribunal is kind of not being fair on me. And, the things I just think we're sweating the small stuff. The other thing I think that might help is sort of what I would say is English perspective on my role. I am a zealous advocate, and I will go all out for my clients' rights. But at the end of the day, I'm a vessel, right? I advocate their rights, whatever that may be. And you should sort of put that in perspective. If you internalize their emotion and sort of feel it as your own, then I think you're going to get into trouble. To think that it's all on you and it's the be all and end all. But I think once you do, like me, once you've done sort of 30, 40, 50, 60 cases, and you remember how it was in 2010, you remember how it was in 2000, and all the cases you've done in between, it gets easier. You sort of think, yeah, I did this last time. Oh, I had the same situation, 15 years ago. I had the same opponent 7 years ago. I had the same arbitrator 12 years ago. You start sort of seeing patterns, and you start being able to sort of compare how you were then and your ability to cope with particular situations. So I think it gets easier over time. I think as a junior, it's easier to get overwhelmed with simply the amount of work. Once you're sort of at a more senior level, you're balancing different types of things: client expectation, firm expectation, administration, business development, children, aging parents, all these kind of different things. But I think if you keep in perspective, I think that's the best way to sort of get yourself a cool mind, as you say.
Mm-hmm. And you manage the team, and for sure you put a value to the teamwork, which I think you mentioned in one of your mentoring series, that it's a big like part of the maybe the main part of the success of the project. But do you think that among the team members there should be a bit of competitive environment, so each member try to learn more and grow more professionally? Do you think so?
Yeah, I have to say I don't. So I've been early on in my career, I was at a law firm where they would publish monthly all associate hours and circulate it to everyone in a memo, right? So you would see yourself in a list. How many hours did you, and it was literally how many hours, okay? And you would see yourself in a particular ranking, right? And of course, the ones who are at the highest ranking were, wow, look at you, aren't you special? You've done 250 hours this year, congratulations. Or someone who is at 130, someone's slacking off, right? And the idea was, I think, to create competition amongst associates on hours, right? At a different law firm, I had a situation where literally you were handpicked, you know your job, there was no competition around you, and you got on with it. I much preferred the latter situation. But I think I understand why the former situation exists, right? Because it's easier for the employer to hire 5 people, right? And whoever is the one that will succeed, however they succeed, whether it's because of merit, because they were strategically able to trample on the others, that person is successful, that person rises to the top, right? That person will make partner and that person will succeed. That is one way of separating, I guess, the successful from the unsuccessful. Mm-hmm. But I hate that. I hate that idea. I would much prefer you handpicked me because you believe in me and you inspire me. You give me the tools I need to succeed. You give me a vision. You give me the pathway, the blue sky to say, go and be the best you can be. And you guide me that way. Now, I understand that that's harder work. It's more expensive and it may not work every time. Right, and it's better to do the competitive model, but I much rather prefer sort of to think of a career in terms of golf. Golf is, it can be that you compete against yourself, right? are you the best that you can be? In other words, here's your score the last round. Can you beat your own score? I much prefer that model than to say, well, look, there are 3 people in your position. Whoever's the best is going to win that position. And then you're sort of put into the gladiator position of the auditorium and say, you know, fight. And whoever ends up at the end wins. I just think that's a bad model.
Mm-hmm. And if you were able to give one piece of advice to your younger self at the start of the career, how do you think what it would be?
I think there are probably 2. One is to keep up with languages, right? So I was a really good French speaker in school, and then I completely gave up, and I've only just restarted it sort of a month ago. Mm-hmm. I wish I had kept that up. So I think keeping up languages, because I think in international arbitration, languages are a really good skill. And I'm starting to learn Russian. And so I've decided, you know, had I done that back when I was a junior, I'd be a fluent Russian speaker, I'd be a fluent French speaker. And I think that would be fantastic. And I wish I had done that. I think certainly that would be one. I think the second one is not to sweat the small stuff. You know, in other words, I remember in 2008 and 9, I was fixated on becoming a partner. Oh my God, Victoria, you know, I was like, it has to happen. And if it doesn't happen, it'll be ruinous. And, you know, I was sort of I wanted to be a partner. And then it happened and it was like, wow. Or I remember I wanted my first arbitrator appointment, or my first ICSID arbitrator appointment, right? It was like, I have to get it. It was like, it's like the brass ring in Lord of the Rings, right? It was something that I was just fixated on. And now looking back, now that I've been a partner for 12 years, I've, you know, obviously had many arbitrator appointments since the first one. I've had a few ICSID arbitrator appointments. It just seems silly to me, you know, that I was so fixated on these credentials or benchmarks to say, I have to have this, I have to, like a checkbox. So I would tell myself, don't sweat the small stuff, right? Because careers are actually quite long, right? You start in your 20s, you'll end up nowadays, if you're an arbitrator, you'll end up, I don't know, till the day you die, you know, but at least 60s, 70s, you know, that's 40 years, it's 50 years. So you really, it's not a race. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so just because other people are passing you, just because someone else had their first arbitrator appointment at 33, you know, just because someone else has made partner and you think you should make partner, all these things are kind of irrelevant in the long term. What matters is your journey. And at the end of the day, looking back and saying, as I said previously, look, I had a good career. I enjoyed it, right? It was worthwhile doing, and I had a good time.
Mm-hmm. And to finish on a lighter tone, I have some quick fire questions for you. So
sure.
The first question, the recent book that you have enjoyed the most?
So I've read a book just now called The Midnight Library. It's fantastic. So what it is, and it's very interesting. It's sort of what I say here is it's about a woman who quite dark, but she takes pills and ends her life, right? Or seeks to end her life. But she doesn't quite succeed. She ends up in a library, and a librarian comes who says, why did you commit suicide? Or why did you choose to commit suicide? And she says, well, you know, my relationship failed, my career failed, my cat died, this happened, that happened, that happened, that happened. And then the librarian says, okay, you can pick a book off the shelf, and that is a different life, you know, like a sliding doors moment. Like this book tells you what would have happened had your relationship not broken up, or had your cat not died, or had you been a famous singer. And you can experience that. Which book do you choose? And she chooses different books, right? And like a relationship hadn't failed, or she had been a famous singer. And she realizes that actually it wasn't that great anyway, right? In the sense that, she chose not to be a famous singer. Oh, I should have been a famous. Had I only been a famous singer, I would have been happy, right? Mm-hmm. If only I had done X. If only I hadn't broken up with that girlfriend, or I had married that woman, or I had taken that job, I would have been happy. And the book showed her that actually there's going to be ups and downs in any choice one makes in life. And so what I liked about the book was it told you that whenever we look back and say, I made a wrong choice, right? Or I regret not doing this or that or the other. The fact is that no matter which choice we take, there's going to be good and bad. And so I like that book because it kind of led me to say, okay, you know what? All the things I think I should have done or could have done or would have done, it's fine. Those are in my midnight library. One day, maybe I'll have a look and I'll say, yeah, it wasn't so great anyway. So live for the present and live in the life that you've chosen. I really like that.
And my second question, do you have any COVID-19 guilty pleasure, like food, TV program, musician?
Yeah. I'm going to open myself to ridicule from my friends for this. TikTok. I have to admit, I've never done a TikTok video, but I did. So I downloaded TikTok because my daughter, who's 11, wanted it. All her friends had it. I think fine, but I went on to track, right, to see what there is, and I have to say it's sort of my guilty pleasure. Once in a while, I like to have a look at the TikTok videos. They are actually, it's a fun app. It is something that that you sometimes you get some really cool videos, and so those of you who don't have TikTok, I would highly recommend it. It's a really good sort of it's a diversion, right? A flirting diversion, I think, is the best way to put it.
And my final question to you, if it becomes possible to travel now, which is the first place you go to?
Great question. I really, really want to go to Uzbekistan. So I, as I said, I don't know why, but I had a lot of Central Asia cases. So I had Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, like lots of cases. And Uzbekistan, I sued 3 times. Those cases are now over. So I feel a bit more important to go to Uzbekistan. I would love to see Central Asia and Kyrgyzstan too. So I represented the Kyrgyz Republic, the respondent side. So I would love to go to the mountains, the lakes, the beautiful architecture. And now that I'm obviously spending a lot of time in Moscow, there are great Aeroflot flights directly to Tashkent and to Bishkek. So yeah, that is definitely on my travel radar, 100%.
Thank you, Baiju. I think we have time for one question from the
Please.
audience.
Of course.
And the question about your experience representing the state in international arbitration, the question, what are the lessons you have learned from representing a state in international disputes?
Yeah, look, representing states is interesting in the sense that I would say there's probably 2 or 3 big things. One is that it's more constrained than representing the investor, right? The investor is interested in one thing, and that's winning and money, right? Whereas for the state, there are certain things you can't say. You want to take, I'll say to the client, if we take this position, we have a higher likelihood of success. But they'll say politically or for public relations purposes, we cannot say this, right? And there are positions I can't take because it just doesn't fit. So I find that particularly interesting. The second thing I think is interesting when one represents the state is who is the client, in the sense that you have a lot of different ministries, different offices, and they're not always aligned, right? One always thinks that, well, the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the General Prosecutor's Office and this office and that office, that, you know, the Ministry of Economics, they're all singing with one voice, and they're not, right? And so one ministry might say that's a great position, another ministry might say it's not a great position. So depending on how the state is structured in terms of your representation, it can be that you take a position that one ministry approves of, that another says, no, it doesn't work for us, because when we are dealing with X, Y, or Z, that doesn't work for us, right? So unfortunately, sometimes representing respondents is a question of compromise, where you can't always take as robust a position you want, where things you write go through various ministries and get watered down. And that's not as easy, you know, that I have to say that's not as easy. Whereas for an investor, they're like, listen, we're in your hands. We want to win the money. We want justice. Go for it, right? And shareholders can be quick. And of course, the other thing about states is that they're slow, right? You need sign-offs. It takes bureaucracy. It can be, you know, you have to really go through the processes, and everyone needs to sign off and check, and it's bureaucratic. Whereas for for an investor, it can be one person who can say on the phone or in a WhatsApp, go for it. And there you go. So to be honest, I like both. They both have their advantages and disadvantages. I've done both, which is fortunate for me. But definitely, I think representing states can be tricky depending on how the state is structured. And also, of course, when cases move from one ministry to another ministry, they can have a different vision, a different philosophy, a different style, you know, of how they want the cases run. It can be tricky.
Thank you very much, Baiju. I think speaking from my side, and I think from all of the audience, I extremely enjoyed the talk. And I think that I can see that how much you love breaking the stereotypes, and you did that, and with so much knowledge and experience behind of that. So I think it's really fascinating. And I think I understand more why you are so remarkable in the field. So thank you so much, seriously, for this amazing talk. And I think I speak on behalf of all the HK45 and all the audience that have attended us today, and will have a chance to watch this interview afterwards.
Victoria, thank you. I really appreciate those kind words. As I said, I try and speak from the heart, and if that resonates, great. And if it doesn't, then it's just me. That's the way it is. But thank you so much for inviting me. And I hope, you know, any little bit that I've said is useful for someone somewhere. That'd be a job well done. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Baiju. Thank you.
Thank you.